Fort Peck Dam, Montana. It is the night of September 21st, 1938. A foreman named James Montfort is laying quarry stone on the upstream face of the dam when he hears water gurgling through the gravel beneath his machine. The tracks start to sink. The railroad has bowed 6 feet. His crew fights until 11 to reach solid ground, then goes home. The next afternoon, everything they stood on is gone. This is the story of the machines that built the largest earthen dam in the world, and the ground that kept 6 of the men who raised it. To understand what happened here, we have to stand where the engineers stood in 1933 on the high plains of northeastern Montana and look at a problem that had no easy answer. The Missouri River ran wide and brown through a valley of soft shale, far out on the empty edge of the country. The plan was to stop it, and not in the way most people picture a dam. There would be very little concrete here. Instead, the engineers would raise a mountain of earth across the whole valley and let the river settle it into stone. This was a hydraulic-fill dam, which means it would be built almost entirely out of mud and sand and water, pumped into place and left to harden. When it was finished, it would run more than 21,000 feet from end to end. That is nearly 4 miles of dam. At its base, it would spread 3,500 feet thick, and it would climb 250 feet above the cleared riverbed. It would swallow about 125 million cubic yards of fill, and more than 9/10 of that would arrive as a slurry through a pipe. Why build such a thing at all? In the middle of nowhere, in the worst economic collapse the country had ever known? The answer was written into the Great Depression itself. In 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt authorized Fort Peck as a public works project with 3 jobs to do at once. It would tame the wild, flood-prone Missouri and hold its high water back. It would deepen the channel far downstream so that barges could run. And most urgently of all, it would put thousands of jobless men onto a payroll in a year when a quarter of the country could not find work. Fort Peck was a flood wall, a shipping channel, and above all, a lifeline for families with nowhere else to turn. There were 2 enemies waiting in that valley, and only one of them could be seen. The first was the river itself, wide and relentless, and it had to be pushed aside before a single shovel touched the valley floor. The engineers could see the river. They could measure it, fight it, and beat it. The second enemy was buried 1,000 feet down, inside the Bear Paw Shale, and it would stay hidden for 5 long years. We will come back to it. First, the machines had to arrive, because at the very beginning there was almost nothing out here. No town, no power, not even a railroad to the dam site. Just wind, badlands, and a river that did not want to move. Before we go any further, if the machines that built America are the kind of story that keeps you watching, take 1 second and subscribe. It is free, and it tells us to keep pulling these out of the archives. Now, back to the river. The first thing they built was not the dam. It was a railroad, a 12-mile spur pushed out from a siding called Wyota, and then more than 50 additional miles of track that ringed the entire site. Wooden trestles were thrown across the coulees so that gravel could be dumped from rail cars straight onto the growing toes of the dam. Then came the power. The 4 dredges at the heart of this project would each need more electricity than a small city, and shipping diesel engines that large into the middle of Montana would have taken 2 years the project did not have. So the engineers went the other way. They ran a power line 288 miles across the plains from the falls of the Missouri near Great Falls. More than 5,000 poles strung up in only 14 weeks, carrying enough current to run a machine that could eat a hillside. Now we can talk about the dredges, because they are the true main characters of Fort Peck. There were 4 of them, and each one was given the name of a river: Gallatin, Jefferson, Madison, Missouri. Each dredge was a floating steel factory, more than 170 feet long. Each one carried more than 12,500 horsepower, and each one could reach a spinning cutter head down more than 50 feet below the surface of the water, chew the riverbed into a soup of sand and clay, and pump that soup away through a pipeline that ran as wide as 6 feet across. This was hydraulic fill in action, and it worked day and night in 3 shifts around the clock. The dredge tore up the earth, the pumps pushed it through the pipe, and gravity did the sorting. The heavy sand dropped out fast and built the strong outer shells of the dam. The fine clay stayed suspended longer, drifting toward the center, where it settled into a soft, wet, watertight core. It was a dam poured back into place like the river it was made from. What was rising here was staggering to see. Stand on the bank at night, and floodlights blazed across the black water while the dredges throbbed without stopping, their pumps driving a river of slurry through miles of steel pipe. And the fill crept upward a few inches at a time, day after day, month after month, year after year. By the time it was done, Fort Peck would stand among the largest structures ever shaped by human hands, and almost every yard of it had been sucked up off the bottom of a river and sprayed into place. Nothing on this scale had ever been attempted before. These dredges did not simply work. They set world records. In the spring of 1936, the dredge Jefferson pumped fill up a lift of 200 feet, shattering the old world record of 85. That autumn, it did it again, this time against a lift of 240 feet. Machines like these had never existed before, so the men at Fort Peck had to build the boats that carried them. Far from any ocean, in one of the most landlocked corners of the country, they opened a shipyard on the empty prairie. They called it the Fort Peck Navy, and locals called it the biggest shipyard in the state. It launched more than 30 vessels, 4 of them the great dredges themselves, and the rest a fleet of pump barges, pontoons, and derrick boats that crawled across the rising reservoir. But a wall of soft sand and mud does not hold a river back by itself. Somewhere under all that fill, water will try to seep through the foundation and eat away at the whole structure from below. So the engineers drove a curtain of steel straight down into the earth beneath the dam, a sheet pile cut-off wall more than 12,700 feet long, made of roughly 34 million pounds of interlocking steel. 2 gantry cranes, each of them standing 196 feet tall, walked the length of the site and hammered that steel down. At one point, they set a world record, driving a single sheet of piling 163 feet into the ground before it finally struck the hard Bearpaw Shale far below. The reservoir would also need a safe way to let water out once it was full, and so, a few miles from the dam, the crews carved an enormous concrete spillway into the plain. 16 great steel gates, each one 25 feet high and 40 feet wide, would stand in a row to meter the Missouri when it rose. Building it meant excavating roughly 14 million cubic yards of earth, pouring more than 500,000 cubic yards of concrete, and setting some 55 million pounds of steel into place. It was these spillway towers, rising alone out of the flat Montana horizon like something ancient, that would very soon make this dam famous far beyond Montana. And then there were the tunnels, because you cannot build in a riverbed while the river is still running through it. 4 diversion tunnels were bored through the hills on the east side, each of them more than a mile long and more than 24 feet across, wide enough to drive a house through. Together, they ran more than 23,000 feet. They swallowed 117 million pounds of steel and 660,000 cubic yards of concrete, and the crews hauled roughly 4 million cubic yards of rock out of the dark to make room. The tunnel men drove themselves so hard that in a single month, in January of 1935, they advanced more than 1,200 feet through solid rock. a world record for their trade. About 4,000 men worked those tunnels for close to 4 years, in dust and blasting and cold. And on the 24th of June, 1937, they turned the Missouri out of its own bed and sent it through the mountain. For the first time in the history of that valley, the riverbed lay dry and open, and the dam could climb across it. Up on the dam itself, the earth moving never slowed. At its peak, a fleet of roughly 250 trucks hauled fill around the site, and on a good day, a truck was loaded on average once every 6 minutes. At the spillway cut alone, 13 power shovels and a drag line tore into the ground while the trucks lined up to carry it away. It was one of the largest earth-moving operations the world had ever seen, and it ran through summers of 115 degrees and winters that fell to 54 degrees below zero. That work came at a price on every shift. Tunneling through rock in the 1930s meant breathing rock dust and standing under freshly blasted ceilings. And across the long years of the project, dozens of men were killed in the ordinary, grinding accidents of heavy construction, crushed, struck, and drowned, long before the slide ever happened. The final toll of the dam would climb somewhere near 60 lives, and different records still disagree on the exact number to this day. Fort Peck was dangerous work in the tunnels, dangerous on the dredges, and dangerous out on the open face of the dam. Now, a word about the machines you would have seen crawling over that fill, because this is where the story is usually told wrong. In 1938, a bulldozer did not look like the sealed, air-conditioned machine you picture today. It was an open crawler. There was no cab. There was no hydraulic arm. The operator sat out in the weather on a bare steel seat, breathing dust, and he raised and dropped the blade with steel cables and hand levers, a system perfected by an inventor named Robert Letourneau. The tractors on this dam were Caterpillar diesels, the big 75 and the older 60, and they steered not with a wheel, but with 2 clutches, one for each track. Anyone who tells you a driver sat in an enclosed cab behind a steering wheel on this dam in 1938 is describing a machine that would not exist for another decade. The men here worked in the open, close to the ground, close to the danger, and the danger was closing in. If you are getting something out of this, there are 2 things you can do that help more than you might think. If you are watching on your phone or your computer, tap the like button and then subscribe. And if you are watching this on a smart television, you can still help. Pick up your remote, use the arrow keys to move down, and highlight the like button and then the subscribe button at the bottom of your screen, and press select on each one. It takes about 5 seconds, it costs nothing, and it keeps this channel alive. Thank you. Now let us go up onto the dam and into the towns that grew up around it. Because while the machines were the story on the river, there was a second story in the mud on the banks. When word spread that the government was hiring, tens of workers became hundreds, and hundreds became thousands. At the peak, on the 15th of July, 1936, more than 10,500 people were on the payroll at Fort Peck. They came in the depths of the Great Depression, hungry for 50 cents an hour, and they built their own towns out of tar paper and scrap lumber because there was nowhere else to live. Wheeler, New Deal, Park Grove, Delano Heights. A dozen shantytowns thrown up around the site almost overnight, with no plumbing, no sewers, and saloons that never closed their doors. The towns were like nothing else in America. Wheeler had a main street of raw plank saloons, dance halls, and gambling rooms where a man could lose a week of wages in a single night. In the so-called taxi dance halls, lonely workers paid 10 cents to dance with a hostess for the length of one song. There were no sewers, so the county passed ordinances forcing families to store their garbage in fly-tight containers and burn or bury it once a week. Children walked to schools thrown together out of Army surplus buildings. And through all of it lay the mud, deep enough in a wet spring to pull the boots off a man's feet. In 1936, a photographer named Margaret Bourke White came out to Fort Peck to shoot the dam. What she captured instead made history. Her photograph of the great spillway towers, standing alone on the Montana plain, ran on the very first cover of Life magazine, dated the 23rd of November, 1936. Inside, she photographed the Boomtowns, the dance halls, the mud and the workers, and one of her captions became famous. "The only idle bed springs in the town of New Deal," it read, "are the broken ones." The place ran day and night. The kitchens turned out 12,000 sandwiches a day. Men slept in shifts in the very same beds. That single issue put this lonely Montana dam in front of the whole country, and decades later the image would appear again on a United States postage stamp. Life in the towns was not gentle, and the government did not always make it gentler. In the winter of 1935, the Army engineers ordered all single men out of the Boomtowns and into government barracks, or else lose their jobs. 2,000 workers signed a petition against that order and sent it to their United States Senator, a Montana man named Burton Wheeler, and Wheeler got the order reversed. These were people, not just labor. They married, they raised children in the tar paper houses, and they buried their dead in the little cemeteries up on the bluffs. And soon there would be more graves than anyone wanted, because for all the records these machines were setting, the ground under the east end of the dam had already, very quietly, begun to move. Which brings us to the 22nd of September, 1938. It did not begin as a day of disaster. It began, the way most disasters do, with a small number that did not add up. That morning, an inspection of the upstream fill near a point the engineers called Station 15+10 found that the surface had settled to 2.5 feet, where it should have measured 4.5. 2 full feet of unexplained sag. A survey crew was sent out to read it, and a meeting was set for 1:15 that afternoon, right there on the slope, with the district engineer, a major named Clark Kittrell. But the ground had been warning them for longer than a single morning. The night before, out on that same east end, the men had felt it coming. James Montfort, the quarry stone foreman from the very start of our story, had felt his drag line begin to sink as water welled up through the gravel with a sound like something breathing underneath. On a later shift, a worker named Lewis Cow watched the railroad track bow 6 feet out of true. They reported all of it. The night crew fought the soft ground until nearly midnight, reached firmer footing, and handed off. And here is the detail that matters most, the detail the men earned the right to be believed about. 80 years later, when engineers went back and studied this failure with modern tools, they confirmed that everything those workers felt in the dark, the seeping water, the sinking machines, the bowed track, were real and true warnings of exactly what was coming. What was coming arrived at about 1:15. Near Station 15, the core pool began to settle in earnest. Cracks opened 30 feet below the crest. And then the entire upstream face of the dam, at a place where construction had already climbed to within 20 feet of the very top, tore loose and began to slide out into the reservoir. It did not happen in an instant. It took roughly 10 minutes, and it moved at the speed of a man jogging. A supervisor named Eugene Torlott, driving along the beach in his car, felt the ground begin to move out from under his wheels. He hit the brakes, threw the car into reverse, and raced backward across the shifting embankment as the earth itself came after him. He outran it. Behind him, roughly 5 million cubic yards of the dam slid into the water. Railroad tracks, locomotives, boats, pipelines, and 34 men were carried down on a moving island of mud more than 1,700 feet wide. A pump barge was swamped and lost. Drag lines and tractors went under. Of the 34 men riding that mass, 26 somehow rode it out and lived. 8 did not. About 180 men had been working that stretch of the dam that afternoon. 10 of them were pulled out injured and treated at the little Fort Peck hospital. And in the first frantic hours, a 9th name sat on the missing list, a worker named Claude Minter, before the engineer's office found him alive and unhurt. He was one of the lucky ones. 8 others were not, and 6 of them would never be found at all. For the men who lived through it, the afternoon of the slide never really ended. An oiler off the dredge Jefferson, a worker named Roy Epperson, had the day off, and his wife Clara had set a pot of beans on the stove and told him to watch that they did not burn. A little after 2 in the afternoon, he heard his neighbor burst into the next apartment and shout to his wife that he was all right, that the dam was gone. The man had been surveying out on the slope when it let go. Another young worker, a man named Louis Archambault, was due to start his shift at 1:30, setting stakes on the very core pool that had just vanished. He arrived to find nothing there at all. So he picked up a long steel probe, walked out onto the wet, broken ground, and began searching it for the bodies of the dead. Word that the dam was going tore through the Boomtowns within minutes. Families did not wait to be told twice. They loaded what they could carry and fled for the high ground above the valley, certain that the whole structure was about to give way and drown them where they stood. It never did. The great mass of the slide came to rest as an island in the reservoir, and the dam, wounded and halted, still stood. But for days afterward, crews worked the broken ground with probes and drag lines, searching for the men who had gone down with it. They found 2. The other 6 they never reached, and in time, the searching stopped, and the fill closed over them for good. If you have made it this far, you already understand what this channel is really about. It is about how these machines worked, and about what they cost the men who ran them. If that matters to you, please subscribe. It is the one thing that keeps this work going. Now, back to the slope, and to the 8 men the ground kept. Let us say their names, because most tellings of this story shrink them down to a number. Oliver Bucher, 58 years old, a family man born in Indiana. Albert Stozer, 23. Nelson Van Stone, 31. Douglas Moore, 35. Archie Moyer, 26. John Johnson, 25. Dolphy Paulson, 41. And Walter Lubinge, barely into his 20s, the son of Dutch immigrants and one of 9 children. Of those 8 men, only 2 were ever recovered from the slide, Douglas Moore and Albert Stozer. The other 6, Oliver Bucher among them, are still inside Fort Peck Dam today, sealed under the weight of the whole dam where they fell. Bucher left behind a wife named Fanny and 5 children, 2 of them still small, a boy of about 8 and a girl of about 5. Fanny would live another 28 years without him. The men who lost friends that day came to see the dam differently ever after. Some of them, for the rest of their lives, called it a gravestone, the largest gravestone in the world. So why did it happen? How does a dam that had survived 5 years of construction, that had set world record after world record, simply walk out into a lake on a calm afternoon? To answer that, we have to go back to the second enemy, the one buried 1,000 feet down, the one the engineers could not see. Construction stopped for about a year while the finest engineers in the country argued over what had gone wrong, and the answer they finally found rewrote the rules of dam building forever. The foundation of Fort Peck sat on Bear Paw Shale, and running through that shale were thin seams of a gray clay called bentonite. Bentonite has a strange and treacherous property. When it stays dry, it is reasonably firm, but when water works into it and pressure builds around it, it turns slick. almost like a hidden lubricated surface buried inside solid rock. As the enormous weight of the dam pressed down over 5 years, the water in that ground had nowhere to escape from the tight shale, and the pressure in the pores of the clay climbed and climbed. That rising water pressure did something invisible and fatal. It quietly carried part of the load that the soil grains were supposed to carry, and the strength holding the foundation together bled away. Think of it this way: the strength of soil comes from its grains pressing hard against one another, grain against grain. Take away that contact, float the grains apart on trapped water, and the ground loses almost all of its grip. That is what happened in the seams of bentonite deep under the east end of Fort Peck. The load of the dam squeezed the water. The water could not drain, and the pressure pried the grains apart from the inside. By the 22nd of September, the foundation under that section was holding on by almost nothing, and no gauge on the surface could see it. Here are the numbers that tell the story. In the laboratory, when engineers later sheared samples of that bentonite, they found its strength could fall to a friction angle of just under 9 degrees, which is already alarmingly weak. But when they went back and calculated what had actually been holding along the base of the slide at the moment it let go, the number was lower still, a friction angle of a little more than 4 degrees. 4 degrees is almost nothing. It is very nearly a frictionless surface. The engineers could measure the water, the steel, and the concrete. They could not measure the clay. And on top of that failing foundation, part of the wet sand, fill itself appears to have briefly turned to liquid, changing from solid ground into something closer to a heavy fluid, which is why the slide traveled so far and so fast. A board of the leading consultants in the country was assembled to rule on it, 9 men in all, and they did not agree. Their official finding, dated in early March of 1939, blamed the weak shale and the bentonite seams in the foundation. But years later, one of the most respected men on that board, an engineer named Arthur Casagrande, admitted that the wording had been a compromise, written carefully to paper over a deep split in the room. Casagrande himself believed that liquefaction had driven the true scale of the disaster, and 2 of the 9 members were so unconvinced by the final report that they refused to sign it at all. Out of that argument came a hard lesson that spread through the whole profession. The great age of building enormous dams out of hydraulic fill was ending. Fort Peck had shown the world what could hide inside a foundation, and engineering would never trust soft ground quite so easily again. And yet the dam did not die. This is the part that still amazes engineers today. After the year-long halt, they rebuilt it, stronger. They flattened the slope so the weight would spread across more ground. They added more sheet piling to tie the old core to the new. They put in relief wells and instruments to watch the very water pressure that had betrayed them. And they finished the thing. On the 11th of October, 1940, the dam reached its full crest, more than 2 years after the slide had torn its face wide open. The reservoir behind it filled into Fort Peck Lake, a body of water 134 miles long, holding more than 18 million acre-feet, with a shoreline of roughly 1,500 miles, longer than the entire coast of California. By the summer of 1943, the first power was flowing out of it. In the end, the project consumed about 47 million hours of human labor and more than $100 million, and it remains, to this day, the largest hydraulically filled earthen dam on the planet. But the ground never entirely stopped being the enemy. Fort Peck was not beaten by the river it was built to stop. It was very nearly beaten by the ground it was built upon. In the summer of 2011, a rare collision of heavy spring rain and a massive mountain snowpack sent the entire Missouri River basin into historic flood. On the 15th of June, the reservoir at Fort Peck reached a record level of about 2,000 252 feet, higher than it had ever stood before. The dam released water at roughly 66,000 cubic feet per second, nearly double its old record, and the spillway ran hard for more than 4 months, tearing at the concrete below the gates. Downstream, across the whole basin, that flood caused more than $2 billion in damage. Fort Peck itself held, but afterward the Army Corps of Engineers spent tens of millions of dollars, more than $42 million on this dam alone, repairing the scars. The largest single repair, rebuilding the battered plunge pool at the foot of the spillway, ran to more than $33 million all by itself and took years to complete. And there are those who believe the danger has never truly gone away. A former state resource official named Bernard Shanks has argued in public that Fort Peck, because of the very hydraulic fill method that makes it so remarkable, is the most hazardous dam in North America, and that a failure here could send a wall of water cascading down through the dams below it. The Army Corps rejects that view. It says plainly that there is no imminent danger, that the dam is inspected constantly, and that it is performing exactly as it should. We are not here to settle that argument. We are here to tell you that the debate exists at all, and that it exists because of what the ground did on one September afternoon in 1938. Many years later, in 2012, on the 75th anniversary of the slide, a memorial was raised near the dam with all 8 names cut into it. Beside the names of the 6 who were never found stands a single note, saying only that they remain entombed in the dam. It is the closest thing to a headstone those 6 men will ever have. Their grave is 4 miles long and 250 feet tall, and every day, the water they died to hold back still presses against it. So this is what the machines built. A wall of earth almost 4 miles long, raised out of river mud by 4 record-setting dredges, a fleet of ships on the high plains, a curtain of steel driven down to bedrock, a spillway to hold back a flood, and 4 tunnels bored clean through a mountain. It is a monument to what people and machines can do when a whole country decides that a thing must be built. But walk out onto that crest today, look across the largest earthen dam in the world, and remember that it is also something else. Somewhere beneath your feet, in the fill they never recovered, lie 6 men who went to work on an ordinary afternoon and never came home. Research like this takes weeks, pulling the old records, checking every claim against the sources, and naming every man we can name. If you would like to help us keep doing exactly that, there is a Buy Me a Coffee link waiting in the description below. Even a single coffee helps keep the lights on and the next story coming. Thank you for that, and thank you for watching this all the way through to the very end. Because a dam is measured by what it keeps out. Fort Peck is also measured by whom it keeps in.